So while you are on your assignment, I have decided to capture a video how I come up with the icons for this particular prompts here. Technology, tools, laptop, smartphone, robot, and agile. Technology. I usually draw a cog for a technology, and I will explain to you my approach to drawing a nice and organized cog. The way I do that is I start by imagining three lines that divide space in equal sectors. Something like that, like a snowflake shape. But I don't draw those lines. I try to see them on the surface of paper, and when I imagine them, those three lines, I start by placing a circle at the center of the intersection of those three lines, and then after that I start arranging pairs of brackets facing each other along those three lines. Something like that. And once I have arranged three pairs of brackets, all is needed to finish is to close those gaps in between. And in that manner you can come up with a nice organized cog that looks okay and correct, and it's quick and simple to draw. And then of course you can make it more complex by, for example, adding more circles in the middle, and that makes it a bit bigger and maybe more detailed. But you can also add more teeth on that cog. For example, if it becomes too big, maybe you want to have more pairs of cog teeth arranged along its outer circle. And then finally, you can combine two cogs together so that they are in interaction with each other, so they're touching each other with their teeth. You start by drawing the first cog, and when you're finished, start the next one by placing its first pair of brackets, and then continue with the other two pairs, and add a couple of motion tokens like that, and suddenly it looks like they are operating. And don't forget to put some shading around it to give it this sense of volume. It always brings icons to life. Next up is tools, and I like to use a range when I draw tools. And range is simple to draw, but many people fail to do that properly. And I'll teach you how to do that properly without mistakes. Pay attention to these openings here. They remind a shape of a house. But you don't draw the entire house shape. You start by placing two house shapes facing each other with their rooftops. And you need to imagine those two shapes facing each other, and you start with them. And then you build the rest of the range around these house shapes. Something like that. Well, it's not super nice, but at least you've got the idea. And then if you want to rotate the range and place it at a certain angle, let's say 45 degrees, then you imagine that line connecting the rooftops, and then you start with the first house shape and then continue with the next one, and then you finish off the rest of the range like that. And then here you can imagine another line, and along that line you can start building up the handle for the hammer, for example, and then you have two tools crossing each other and creating a nice icon for tools, for example. And then there are more tools out there. You can use screwdrivers, you can use a saw, and many more. just keep in mind that you can combine different tools together, creating some really cool combinations. The next up is the laptop. And you remember we talked about scaling the size of the icon and maintaining the level of detail. So let's say if that's a different scale of size, then if we're talking about a super tiny small laptop, I would draw it something like that, and maybe we'll just add a couple of lines for the keyboard so it doesn't look like a book, a line on its side. And when I draw a large laptop, something like that, I don't want it to look too barren. I want it to have more detail so it doesn't look dull and boring. I would add an extra volume here, and then I would add more lines for the keyboard and even have a touchpad as well. And then maybe a couple dots for the microphone and a camera. And then remember the small guy with the arms. Then you can combine the guy with a laptop and suddenly you have a developer, for example, or a person working with a laptop. So as simple as that. The next step is the smartphone. Following the same idea, small to big. Small laptop is something like that. A rectangle, couple dots, a line. And the bigger one deserves more detail. So we'll draw something like this. So it doesn't look as boring. And then the tricky one, if you want to draw a person holding a smartphone, remember that you can serve as a model for yourself. You can grab your smartphone and then try and pay attention how your hand looks like while holding the smartphone, and then start by drawing the rectangle of the smartphone, and then watch the rest of the composition fall into place. So you have this part of the palm going somewhere like here, so maybe this part here with your big palm, and then the rest of your palm go in this direction, and then the fingers popping out from the other part, and then continuing the lines of the arm here. So yeah, I messed up my thumb a bit, and maybe the angle of the index finger is wrong, but it's difficult to draw hands, and the idea here is that you need to practice and remember that you could just use yourself to see how it looks like. And trust me, it will become better over time. It looks a bit odd right now, but a few iterations more and I'll get there. Robots. I usually start with a rectangle for the head, with a couple dots for the eyes, mechanic mouth, the bolts sticking from the sides of the head and antenna, and a mechanical neck, a rectangular body, maybe even with a kind of a gauge in the middle, mechanical hands with those kind of claws instead of the arms. And then you can go crazy because it's not necessarily a rectangle that you need to use as a foundation shape. For example, you can use the rounded heads. You can be creative as far as the ears, some kind of a I don't know, stripes, and then antenna is always a good idea, and then the rounded body. You can place different things in their hands. Instead of those claws, you could use some kind of a drilling cones, and I don't know what it could be. Okay, maybe a maybe a hose with a fire coming out of it. And instead of legs, you could use wheels, for example, something like that, and a lot of lamps. And I like this joke, and I'm going to draw this. So a guy looking into the frame, kind of saying hi, and some distressed emotion on its mechanical face, and saying something, "Oh my." We shouldn't have taken their jobs. Totally stolen somewhere on Instagram, but redrawn in my style. And as usual, adding shadows brings life and volume to your visualizations. Something like that. Alrighty, and finally, Agile. I'll show you a few home-brewn icons I use a lot when discussing things Agile. And I guess the most popular and the most commonly used icon is an icon for a backlog. And if you don't know what backlog means, basically a backlog is a collection of things that a team or an organization has to do in order to deliver a certain product or services. And those things in that collection are usually ordered according to some priority. And I usually draw a backlog as a tall rectangle with dotted line in the bottom, suggesting that it's bottomless. And then I place 3 elements, some abstract elements there, suggesting that those are pieces of something. And the tall structure of it suggests that there is an order, and you remember that when we look at things arranged in a vertical manner, we usually expect most important things on top. So it's a win-win situation. And I use that a lot, so I guess I educated my teams and my audience about this being a backlog already. It's highly recognizable, but you are more than welcome to reuse it. The next icon which I find super useful is a logo for the Scrum framework, which is 3 arrows, 1 straight and 2 circular ones. But the good thing about this particular logo is that if you simplify it like this, it could be a logo for all things Agile in general. If you draw it like this, it could be an icon for anything related to Agile, really. People seeing those 2 circular arrows understand it has something to do with Agile because it's already a recognizable symbol. And then finally, another useful icon within the Agile context is one person, a group of people standing next to a Kanban board, which can be simplified by drawing something like this, like to do in progress done, and it works like a charm. And when you draw it like this, usually people understand we're talking about a daily ceremony within a lot of Agile methodologies and frameworks. So I hope you liked these suggestions and could repurpose them for your needs. And I can't wait to see your assignments accomplished.